What is going on, everybody? I hope you're having a great day today. This is Alex from the Fresh Fantasy Podcast. This is the 16th episode of Season 3. Today, we're going to be talking about must-have players, guys like Trey Lance, Cortland Sutton, James Conner, and guys that we cannot stop drafting and that we need on our teams this year in half PPR. Joining me today to break this all down is a legend in the fantasy football industry, widely regarded as one of the greatest to ever do it, and he is also the co-owner of one of the longest running fantasy football sites on the planet with over 98,000 followers on Twitter. He is Footballguys Sigmund Bloom. Welcome to the show, Sig.
Thanks for having me. And I'd like being on the Fresh Fantasy Podcast in June because if you look, there might be an expiration date on some of these takes. Once camp starts, once we start hearing more about how these teams are coming together. But for now, for those of us that are tuned in June, it is fresh. It's summertime. You can feel it in the air.
Absolutely. You can totally feel it in the air. You can feel it in the takes. And this is the time for speculation. It's the time to get excited. And of course, there's going to be some camp things. And, someone's going to gain 10 pounds and look a little slow. And automatically, we're not going to want to draft them anymore. But this is a time that I think is super exciting. And it's time that people start to, start turning their, their fantasy computers. I mean, for us, we're on 365 days a year. But for some people, in June and July, they're going to start to turn it on, and everybody else will come in August. But I'm so excited for it. I'm excited to get into the show today. I think must-have players are always a really fun topic to talk about. And these must-have players will probably change next month. But these are players right now that I think we're both really excited about. And the first one, we will start it off with you because you're the guest today. So who is your first must-have player?
Well, first, I want to make a nod to my co-host on the Audible, who really is responsible for starting the Audible, Cecil Lammey, who covers the Broncos. And he's put out there unequivocally that Cortland Sutton is Russell Wilson's guy. That's enough for me. All right.
Really?
I mean, that is enough for me. He's going to the practices every day. He's in the building. He's talking to people. But the other thing is, Alex, what I like to get a hold of, try to catch a comet and take a ride, is that unknown upside. That's the Broncos offense. That's the Broncos passing game. We have no idea how good this offense can be. And really, you can make an adjacent take to this. It doesn't have to be Cortland Sutton for you. It might be Russell Wilson. It might be Javonte Williams. It might be Jerry Jeudy. It might be Tim Patrick. It might be whoever you think is going to be the number one tight end. Greg Dulcich actually is maybe threatening Albert O. A lot to watch here. But much like the last time the Broncos brought in a splashy veteran quarterback, Peyton Manning, it totally changed the offense. It destroyed our sense of the range of outcomes for these players. So as you were talking about in the lead-in, right now, what you should be doing is starting to sketch out in your mind, well, what are the range of outcomes? We have enough time as we learn more to fix, well, what's our prediction of where they're going to fall in that range of outcomes? But right now, what I'm focusing on is change that creates a much higher top end range of outcomes than maybe we contemplated with this player. And remember, Cortland Sutton was dragging fantasy teams down last year, but was it really Cortland Sutton or was it Drew Lock?
Yeah.
Was it the Broncos offense? So Cortland Sutton is going to have a quarterback in Russell Wilson who's willing to throw in 50-50 balls, a quarterback who's going to extend plays, and an offense that's going to be very tough to defend. So I think whatever piece you want to put your chip on in that Broncos offense, you need to get part of it because it's going to be a lot better than the last time we saw it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm totally with you. And on that point of the quarterback play, you could see it last year in the air yards comparison, from like DK Metcalf to Cortland Sutton if they play similar roles. I know they're not the same exact player, but they were within 60 air yards of each other. They were getting the same type of volume. It just happened that, DK Metcalf was the wide receiver 10 and Cortland Sutton was in the wide receiver 40 range.
Right.
And I think a lot of that had to do with quarterback play. I'm not saying that they're the same level talent, that they're but a big of that 30 wide receiver gap in finish when they had similar air yards probably has a lot to do with quarterback play, and I think that's going to elevate Sutton a lot. And I'm excited that Cortland Sutton is Russ's guy. I think I love to see what that potential would be. And again, we've seen it from Cortland Sutton before, that we haven't exactly seen from Jerry Jeudy, where he actually has produced on the field. He's in the year 2 coming off his ACL injury. I'm so excited for Cortland Sutton this year, and I hope that he is the guy. But another guy that I'm also really excited about that is like similar to honestly, this guy is even better than Robert Woods was as someone that's always underrated, but it's Brandon Cooks. Every single year, underrated in fantasy football, every single year outproducing his ADP. And Brandon Cooks last year, in the games that he played with this year's quarterback, Davis Mills, averaged 9 catches, 72 yards, 16 fantasy points per game. And that was the wide receiver 12 last year in PPR leagues, at least. And rookie QBs usually take a step forward as a passer in year 2. And not only that, but Brandon Cooks is going in the late wide receiver 20s, early 30s range sometimes. And yet last year he was top 10 in target share, top 12 in targets, 13th in deep targets. And he's had over 1,000 yards in 6 of his 7 seasons. And he's only 28 years old with a year 2 quarterback that might give him similar to a 30% target share this year. I think Brandon Cooks is forever underrated. Am I, too much in on Brandon Cooks, or do you feel the same way?
No, this is one of those situations where, for whatever reason, the fantasy community is not embracing the talent that Brandon Cooks is. And it might well be going into last year, you would say, oh, okay, well, look at the string of quarterbacks he's had. Yes, he's changed teams and defied that, but look at the quarterbacks he's had. Well, now he's done it with Davis Mills. So what else does he need to do? So I think you're right. This is just taking advantage of a market inefficiency that, for whatever reason, Brandon Cooks, it's one of those situations, Alex, where if you gave his stats to a player that maybe people saw as a sexier fantasy commodity, DJ Moore or something like that, then he would be drafted around his production, but for whatever reason. And the other point to bring up here is the Texans haven't done anything offensively to make you think they're going to go away from him as a number 1 receiver. And he's already produced when he was the only real threat on the field for the team. So you already have a good test case. And this team is playing for Lovie Smith. So this isn't we're not looking at an Urban Meyer type situation where the offense is going to collapse and everybody. Well, because sometimes it happens. You see a team lose their nerve during a season. So whatever our expectations are, when you see a team look like they've lost their way, then they're not going to help your fantasy team. That's not the case for the Texans.
No, I 100% agree. And beyond that, I think the point that you made that also people aren't looking at the fact is that last year with, Tyrod Taylor and Davis Mills and a rotating group at quarterback, he was already a top 20 wide receiver. What's changed? Is John Mechie all of a sudden going to come in command like a crazy target share? I don't think so. It's not going to be Brevin Jordan. Okay, sorry. Maybe, you know what? I'm discounting Rex Burkhead. Rex Burkhead is probably going to demand a 20% target share out of the backfield. But again, Brandon Cooks, forever underrated and forever a value in fantasy football drafts. But who is your second must-have player on your list for today?
Radioactive. This is one of the players that is polarizing in the fantasy world. So I'm happy to jump in and endorse Gabriel Davis. Come on, folks. Ooh. Is it possible that Gabriel Davis is actually still underrated? Yes, he is still underrated. And I see some comparisons, players that had this much target share in year 1 and this much in year 2 and this many yards per route run or whatever. How many of those guys broke the record for touchdowns in a playoff game?
0.
How many of those players had one of the ascendant elite quarterbacks in the league as their quarterback?
0.
Right? So I get it. And there's an amazing, in the time that I've been doing fantasy football, the amount of analytics, the amount of data modeling, the amount of using data to ask the right questions and get closer to that golden thread of truth that you follow. It's been outstanding, and it's added so much to the conversation. It's pushed so much forward. But when you put a whole bunch of disparate cases together in a bucket and you make a conclusion about a player that has something in common with those cases, you also have to look at the context to see what they don't have in common. Yep. And I think the 2022 Gabriel Davis, whatever happens with Gabriel Davis this year, there is no precedent for 2022 Gabriel Davis. You're not right or wrong because of what has come before with players that have something statistically or with draft capital or whatever you want to use to draw a connection between Gabriel Davis and another player, because we haven't seen a player like him before. And the other thing is, Alex, at least if we're looking at action as speaking on behalf of the organization, they have done nothing to show that they have anything but the utmost confidence in Gabriel Davis to be their every down outside wide receiver opposite Stephon Diggs. Unlike last year when they signed Emmanuel Sanders, this year they focused on the slot position. Jamison Crowder, they drafted Khalil Shakir. And Khalil Shakir can play outside, don't get me wrong. So, I mean, he's a prospect, I think, that is better than a typical 5th-round prospect. Even James Cook can play some in the slot, but there's nobody that's going to threaten Gabriel Davis's playing time. The other thing that people have to understand about Gabriel Davis and Josh Allen is they do have chemistry. You saw this even in the rookie year. The next gen stats where they say this ball has a 17% chance of being caught or something like that. Josh Allen is willing to throw those 17% balls to Davis, and Davis catches them. Davis
Absolutely.
makes him look good for giving him a chance to make a play. So this is another unknown upside player to me, Alex. And I think whether it's Stephon Diggs or Dawson Knox or Gabriel Davis, again, I think at least one player in this passing game is going to knock their ADP out of the park. Since Gabriel Davis is still relatively reasonable, I think he's the one we're taking a chance on, and especially in 0.5 PPR. Let's go back to 0.5 PPR for a second, because 0.5 PPR puts an emphasis on players that make plays downfield, and it puts an emphasis on touchdowns. That's Gabriel Davis, baby.
Yep, it totally is. And I think that, and Sig, I wanted to argue with you here, and probably about 2 weeks ago, I would have, until I had Dwayne McFarland of PFF on my podcast, friend of the show.
Smart guy.
And he broke it down. And he's basically just said that all the underlying metrics with Gabriel Davis said that this is a guy that is like getting ready to produce. It's not the guy that had the low target share. It's a guy that all the underlying metrics and when he was on the field was really, really good. And I think the other thing is like he was literally over the last like 5 or 6 weeks of the season when he finally got the snap share that we're looking for and he became like a full-time player. He was a top 20 fantasy wide receiver.
Right.
And you know, the funny thing, Sig, he's going into his third year, and players have a funny way of improving, usually from year 2 to year 3.
Right. You would almost think, and I don't want to sound dismissive or mean when I present it like this, Alex, but it's almost like a competent organization drafted him to become a starter before the end of his rookie contract, and all of the things they've seen from him on the field has shown them that he's ready.
I didn't know you would think that organizations don't do that. I know there's some that don't. Right. But not the Bills. The Bills have made a lot of smart decisions. Yeah. And I think the other thing that like you pointed out is this team, like you didn't point out, but another thing is this team was about like 13 seconds last year from being in the Super Bowl. But that's the thing. They were 13 seconds away. And did they try to bring in Allen Robinson or Julio Jones or some other big name wide receiver that they easily could have brought in to contend? No. Because they clearly believe in Gabriel Davis and the talent that they have. If, like you said, like they draft a 5th-round rookie wide receiver and they could have easily spent $3 or $4 million to bring in someone else, bring in Antonio Brown, bring him back to the Bills.
No, don't play yourself by thinking he's going to play. Yeah. That's what he's told. Antonio Brown always tells us the truth, right?
Yeah. Oh, always. I think that he's going to play. I will still be drafting him in the last round of every single draft this year. And when he probably plays week 1, it's going to feel good for about 3 weeks before he takes his jersey off again.
Right. Right.
But I'm excited. My second player is a guy that we also don't know if he's going to, take the jersey off or put it on again. And it's Rob Gronkowski. And Rob Gronkowski to me is like it's insane to me of how good that he even was last year, a year removed after like taking that year where he had a break from football. He comes back and was a tight end 1 when he was playing. And then you had his second year, a year older, and he does even better. Mm-hmm. Sig, there were only 3 players with a higher points per game than Rob Gronkowski last year. Mark Andrews, George Kittle, Travis Kelce. Outside of those 3 players that are all amazing, no other tight end in the NFL had a higher fantasy point per game than Rob Gronkowski. And he also did that with Chris Godwin there and Antonio Brown there. He was better last year than he was the year before, yet there's guys like Noah Fant, Robert Tonyan, and Albert O sometimes going in front of him in drafts. It's crazy to me. And I think the other thing is that I think if Rob Gronkowski wasn't playing, we would know by now. It's June. So I would think that Tom Brady's got his guys in order and that he knows that, like, Gronk, I'm counting on you to be back for at least one more season. And I think that with the lack of target competition, at least for now, and what Chris Godwin's going to look like, I like Russell Gage, but Antonio Brown's not there to demand a heavy portion of targets, whether you love him or you hate him. He demands targets, and I think that Gronk will get a ton this year. I think that he's a huge value in drafts right now. I'm not saying that he's going to be a top 5 tight end like he was in points per game, but I think that he'll be a low-end tight end 1 that could legitimately get into the top 6 or 7 should he stay healthy and he plays this year.
Yeah, I think you've got a slam dunk here, right? First of all, Gronk was working out at that baseball field, right? Taking batting practice.
Yeah.
With Brady, which is where Brady has his offseason workouts. It's like, hint. Like you said, we haven't seen anything affirmative that says he's not going to play. Going back to last year, and know this, Alex, I was the analyst who was willing to die on the Rob Gronkowski hill for most of my career. Whether no matter how bad the injury he was coming back from was, no matter how many games he was supposed to miss at the beginning of the year, I always stumped for him because. And Adam Harstad, my colleague at Football Guys, and you're also my colleague at Football Guys, showed that on some of these metrics before they were fashionable, like on a points per route run or points per snap or points per target, Rob Gronkowski was up there with the best wide receivers. And what we saw at the beginning of last year was that old Rob Gronkowski. And he was making those plays, those dominant plays at the catch point that he was making, especially in the red zone, back when he was almost an unfair advantage for those stretches of time that he was healthy. Now, the caveat is he took some hard hits and started to look more his age and more his mileage as the season went on. But at tight end, you either want one of those dependable top 3 or 4. We'll see if it expands beyond that, but it's usually 3 or 4 tight ends. Or you're just with everybody else. You're rolling the dice. You're spinning the roulette wheel. Rob Gronkowski, at least at the beginning of the year, if he does what he did last year, is going to get your team off to a good start. Like you said, he's ridiculously cheap. And if he decides he's not going to play, what did you really lose? You didn't.
Nothing. It's the last one in your draft.
And then you take Brevin Jordan or Irv Smith or whoever you want to pair up with him. You don't have to spend a pick on early tight end. You might get early tight end production for at least part of the season. And also, as you mentioned, I think there's something to follow up on with Tampa that, we'll see when Chris Godwin gets back on the field. But they have a free-for-all for their their fourth wide receiver after Russell Gage. But if you don't like Rob Gronkowski, maybe it's in the initials, right? I think that there's a reasonable position, Alex, that you should either be in on Rob Gronkowski or you should be in on Russell Gage or maybe Cameron Brate. If you really think Gronk isn't coming back, Brate is more than serviceable as a receiving tight end. There's somebody in that Bucs pass offense that's going to greatly outproduce their ADP.
Exactly. And that's again, and what are we talking about here? We just talked about the Bills and the Bucks. Like these are the teams that you want to target where it's a little bit ambiguous of who's going to be that guy, and someone is going to outproduce their ADP super significantly. And those are the guys that are going to win your leagues.
Yeah.
Guys like that you don't know exactly who's going to break out, but you go into the high powered offense and you draft someone with a good ADP, and all of a sudden you look like a genius. Like it's crazy. But and again, I was one of the people that didn't believe that last year. I should have just drafted Leonard Fournette in the 7th or 8th round. I was a Ronald Jones guy, and I learned. But
right situation, wrong player is. Here's the 2 things that have happened so often during my career that in my grave I'll still be shaking my fist. Sometimes it's right situation, wrong player, and sometimes it's a year early.
Yeah.
But the point is, add into your takes out there, folks, that we want to make our takes that we're confident and we have some conviction. That's what we're here to talk about today.
Of course.
But being flexible and understanding that you were right for the wrong reasons or something like that, and being ready to pivot quickly, being ready to pivot when you've been presented with new information and backing off of your priors is probably the most important skill for a fantasy football player.
100%. And I agree. And so many people get are like they don't want to, they believed in their take and they don't want to jump off of it. But again, when new information presents itself, you have to be ready. But again, we could get on a rant and talk for the rest of the episode.
Well, and really quick on that.
Yeah.
The point is your take might be right or some part of your take is right. Sure. So it isn't saying you're wrong. It's just understanding which part of it was right and knowing how to react appropriately.
100%. And people do not realize that enough. And maybe, on that note, Sig, of not realizing it enough, your next player could be a guy that people are not realizing enough the greatness that he could be this year. Please give us your third player.
This is not complicated. And I get it. Breece Hall has the measurables. Breece Hall is the proven pass catcher. Breece Hall is also a Jet. I'll hold my nose when I say that. He's a Jet. When was the last time the Jets offense produced somebody that we were really excited to have on our fantasy team? Maybe a couple of weeks of Elijah Moore last year.
Yeah.
I don't know. And I'm not saying Breece Hall can't change that, okay? I'm not saying he can't change that. However, if you're looking for a rookie running back, because again, going back to the olden days, and it seems like it's coming back around, Alex, where, boy, there was a stampede to get those rookie running backs in your redraft leagues. This is back in the days of stud running back drafting, right? Because you knew there was going to be a rookie running back. Most years there was going to be a rookie running back who was going to finish in the top 10, if not top 5. And even, someone like Ezekiel Elliott, who had the biggest hype for fantasy. I think he was a first-round pick in fantasy leagues as a rookie. Saquon Barkley, I think, was also. Those guys produced. So there's no such thing as being now, I shouldn't say that. The last few years, rookie running backs have been disappointing. Rookie running backs in redraft leagues have been disappointing. Why will Kenneth Walker not follow that? Why will he actually be good? Well, first of all, let's just look at the situation. Chris Carson, I mean, the Seahawks are all but telling us that they don't even know if he's going to play football again. Do I even need to finish saying his name? When was the last time Rashad Penny stayed on the field? I know he was good at the end of the year last year. And look, I get it. Oh, don't overreact to June, May injuries, but it's not. You want him to get through the summer without any nicks or bumps if you want to have confidence that Rashad Penny is going to live up to his end of the year performance. Everything is the way is going to be paid for Kenneth Walker, and he's on a team that's committed to the run. He's on a team that is not even just committed to the run, Alex, but the way that he is a volume runner, a runner who puts the lean on the defense, a runner who is intelligent and subtle, but also has speed and has power and can make himself small and get yards after contact. I think that we're looking at, if you're projecting the Seahawks backfield, Alex, I mean, how is anything but Kenneth Walker leading this backfield in touches and maybe dominating the touches, maybe being that guy, one of the few true lead backs in the NFL? I think he's around running back 20, running back 25. So especially if you're hesitant to spend early picks on running backs because of the volatility of their value, this is a guy who absolutely has top 10 within his range of outcomes. And I don't see Rashad Penny as a threat. If the only thing stopping you from taking Kenneth Walker is Rashad Penny, then nothing should be stopping you from taking him.
Yeah, I'm a little bit more on the other side on this one. As much as I would like to
take them both, even.
Yeah, you could take them both, but would you at least agree that the Seahawks will probably have one of the 10 worst offenses in the NFL next year overall?
They will. However, how good was the Steelers' offense last year?
Yeah. It was definitely not I don't think it was bottom 10.
I think efficiency wise it was, but probably because of just the sheer number of pass attempts and things like that. But it's not going to the Seahawks offense is going to be bad. You're right about that. And it may drag everyone down to the bottom of the ocean. The other thing real quick as an aside on that too is DK Metcalf was actually productive with Geno Smith last year. Now I don't know if it's Drew Lock running for the hills for that, but we'll see. But you're right. You're right to be hesitant because I think one of the other themes is good offenses. When I think a sound fantasy strategy that I haven't tried out is just to winnow it down to like the 6 or 8 best offenses and say, I'm only taking players from those offenses. I bet it would work.
Yeah, it totally might. Well, the point I was trying to make with the bottom 10 offense is the fact that, and this is a stat from Josh Larkey. I mean, amazing. Shout out to Josh, also another friend of the show. He's amazing. But he looked at the 10 worst offenses last year, and running backs in those offenses only averaged 0.56 fantasy points per carry. So if Kenneth Walker hit 250 carries this year, that's 15 a game. I mean, I think we'd be pretty happy to see 15 carries per game from Kenneth Walker over the course of the full season. That's only 100 fantasy points, on average. And I'm sure, Kenneth Walker is better than average, but 140 fantasy points, that's less than 10 fantasy points per game. And I think that the point I'm trying to make here is because the passing volume is probably not going to be there. It absolutely could be, and I'm sure he could take the role. But regardless if he's getting 15 carries a game and he's not really getting the passing work, I think it's going to be harder for him to maintain a really high level in the offense. And I just think that the mid running back 20s right now is just a little bit too rich for me. And I think it's just more of a tier gap thing, that there's other guys right around that range where I think there's a little bit of a drop off where Kenneth Walker could be, the real running back 26 or 27. I just think there's a real big gap between the guys that are going at 23, 24 than to 27.
Yeah, I think that's where I think your concerns are all valid, but I think they're already priced in. Yep. I would contend, even in a bad offense, Alex, that a rookie running back drafted in the second round without any significant proven competition is usually going to go a lot higher than the running back.
Fair. And just to your point here, a rookie running back, as disappointing as they have been, has finished in the top 6 in 4 of the last 5 years, minimum top 15 in Miles Sanders this year. I mean, it's going to be Breece Hall, but on the history, it is.
So look, people can take some actionable advice away from our wonderful conversation here, which is target one of them, whether it's Breece Hall or Walker. pick your favorite and make them part of your plan.
Yeah, because if Breece Hall is a true Jet that we've watched over the last 10 years, it'll be Kenneth Walker that probably finishes in the top 6 or top 15 or whatever it is. So we will see, but nonetheless, excited to see that. Let's move on to our fourth guys. I still have my third guy. What am I doing? I'm just so excited. My third guy, also a running back, also someone that has a little bit of concern, but it's James Conner, and I'm not as concerned with James Conner as I think a lot of other people are, and I'm excited to see what he can do. I mean, James Conner was the running back 5 overall with Chase Edmonds for most of the year, and I know that James Conner had 19 touchdowns in 16 games, and I'm sure he's going to regress, but Chase Edmonds averaged 12 touches a game in games with James Conner last year. 12 touches a game, and I know that James Conner is the most injury-prone player in the history of the NFL, but James Conner has also played at least 13 games in 4 of his 5 seasons. If you told me I could draft a running back and they will guaranteed at least play 13 games this year, I'm signing up. Sign me up. I will absolutely take that, knowing they'll probably miss 4 games or less. And James Conner's played a minimum of 10 games every year. And I know that he can't play the full season. It's the same thing with Dalvin Cook. He plays almost the whole year and misses a couple of games. Therefore, he's terrible and we don't want to draft him. But I'm going to take that discount, with James Conner. Edmonds also leaves behind 53 targets, and I think their offense is going to be pretty similar. Christian Kirk's also not there. I know they're bringing Marquise Brown in, but the running back targets will be there. I know that Darrell Williams is there now and that he is going to steal a little bit work. I think that Darrell Williams is probably one of the most valuable handcuffs in the NFL at this point, because I think that he'll do exactly what he did last year. Should James Conner get hurt, and James Conner will probably miss a couple games, but point being with James Conner, running back 5 overall with Chase Edmonds. Do people really think that Darrell Williams is going to get anything near the work that Chase Edmonds got last year? Probably not. And I know he has to stay healthy. I know he'll have to score touchdowns, but this is still going to be an explosive offense that'll score, and I'm willing to buy the cheaper price that James Conner is right now, going outside the top 15 usually.
Right. And you're right about that. I mean, I think there's an emotional thing where James Conner had a run as the Steelers lead back and wore down by the end of the year and wasn't necessarily there for us. So it leaves an emotional scar, right? But that's more than priced into his ADP because he has the outlook of a first or second round pick in redraft leagues, and he doesn't have to spend that on him because of that. The Cardinals offense is going to be interesting this year. You have 6 games without DeAndre Hopkins. Is that going to make everything tighter? Even in that case, you're still going to get those touches. The only thing I would add to that is just this is, Alex, I think, a legit handcuff situation. Are we still allowed to use handcuff? I know that.
Yeah.
Maybe I try to say injury upside backup now, right? It's a legit injury upside backup situation. It does look like it's going to be Darrell Williams. Watch Keontae Ingram, very talented, once highly recruited back. Maybe he could get some work right away. Watch what they're saying about him out of camp, out of the preseason. You want to know who's behind James Conner and maybe even draft them and carry them, just because of the likelihood that there will be at least 2 or 3 games that somebody else is going to start. But you're right. He's just ridiculously underpriced at this point. And the Cardinals, remember this about the Cardinals, and this is really sad, actually, that Jeff Gladney, first round pick from the Vikings a couple of years ago.
Rest in peace.
Yeah, rest in peace. And it's sad. And I mean, too soon, right? Football analysis. But look, even with Jeff Gladney, and the Cardinals really thought they had something here, because Gladney, remember, the Vikings released him. I think it was maybe a domestic violence charge, but I don't know if he was acquitted or all charges were dropped, but that just resolved itself this offseason. And within a week or two, the Cardinals swooped in and picked him up. And I think they saw him as a starter. I mean, they got Byron Murphy, Marco Wilson, and Jeff Gladney was going to be one of their starters. And remember, they lost Chandler Jones. I know people can say Chandler Jones wasn't that good last year, but still, at least Chandler Jones strikes a little bit of fear in the heart of an offensive coordinator saying, I have to account for this. So if you don't have pass rush and you don't have corners, this is going to be a very high scoring offense. So again, if it's not James Conner, then it's Zach Ertz. It's somebody, because this is an offense that, if you look across the ADPs, is being treated as a mediocre to poor offense. But I think this could be one of those offenses that just by necessity has to put it into overdrive and try to just run up the score on their opponents, because the opponents are going to run up the score on them.
Yeah, and I know this isn't in age and talent, this isn't a fair comparison, but I think it's a little bit of last year where it's like Joe Mixon syndrome.
Yeah.
Where clearly talented, clearly going to play in a high-scoring offense, and clearly going to have a super big role, but people don't want to draft him because the emotional scars that have been left over the last couple of years. And those are the players that, aren't easy to draft because every time it still hurt me and it scared me drafting Joe Mixon. But I just said, okay, like again, like everything points to as long as he stays healthy, he is going to be a big producer. It's the same thing with James Conner, and people should not be so afraid. But I understand. I completely understand where they're coming from. But fantasy football gets emotional sometimes. That's just part of it. So that is what it is. But we'll move on to our fourth player of the day. Sig, who is your next player that is a must-draft guy for you?
Yeah, and it's not necessarily all early picks. And then we're in 0.5 PPR here. Okay. I don't know exactly what his ADP is, but I know you're going to be able to get him as a bench player, an upside swing at the fences guy, and that is Marquez Valdes-Scantling. And we'll see what happens with Patrick Mahomes. We know Travis Kelce's going to get his. Sky Moore, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, Mecole Hardman. Okay, maybe not Mecole Hardman. Maybe Mecole Hardman. I don't know. Juju Smith-Schuster. But the key here with Marquez Valdes-Scantling is, number one, they made a big investment in him. And however we think about the contracts, if we think he's not worth $10 million a year, the Chiefs thought he was. Okay. Yeah. So that just shows you their estimation of what he can add to their offense. Now, they might be wrong. I think you have to ask yourself a question, Alex. How much of Marquez Valdes-Scantling's inconsistency was the ups and downs of the relationship with Aaron Rodgers, and how much of it was because he's an inherently inconsistent player? Chiefs don't seem to think he is an inherently inconsistent player. They didn't give him a 1-year prove-it deal. They gave him a deal that shows they have some confidence in him. Who's the player that is going to be downfield when Patrick Mahomes extends plays? Who's the player that, if they're able to draw up the defense and he can take a shot downfield? That's Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Alex, he only needs to catch like 4 or 5 long touchdowns to blow his ADP out of the water.
Yeah.
And it's a chip on Patrick Mahomes as much as it is on Valdes-Scantling at the price, especially in 0.5 PPR that emphasizes those big play players. I think this is a no-brainer.
Yeah, I think that in ADP, I think that he's probably going to beat his ADP. I think the thing that I worry with Marquez Valdes-Scantling a little bit, and like I'm not someone that's a Juju stan. Like Juju's yards per run has gone down every single year of his career. I don't think that he's going to be good. I know that people love to be like the narrative of that he's had 2 90+ catch seasons and he's 25, whatever. But Juju's not going to be it. And like Sky Moore is going to be what Sky Moore is, and Travis Kelce is going to be Travis Kelce. But what I worry for MVS is just more that he's going to end up as in maybe like a slightly better Mecole Hardman, where like, yeah, sure, maybe he'll beat his ADP because he catches those 4 or 5 long touchdowns. But at least in redraft leagues, I don't know when those touchdowns are going to come.
That's fair.
I think he's great in best ball, but I just don't know in redraft that I feel like I'm playing darts too much with when the weeks that'll pop off, but he will pop off.
So the question about the Chiefs offense that we're all going to have to discern is it going to be someone different every week, or will there be windows where somebody gets hot?
Yep.
Because again, those 4 names, Moore, Smith-Schuster, Hardman, and Valdes-Scantling, they all should be on your radar. And you should be ready to act. So here's something I want to point out, because what I spend a lot of time doing right now, Alex, is looking at the schedule. I'm looking at like the first 3 weeks, first 4 weeks, first 6 weeks, sometimes even the first week or two. And Kansas City opens with Arizona, the Chargers, the Colts, Tampa, Vegas, Buffalo.
Wow.
Those are not going to be low-scoring games. Those are not going to be conservative games. Maybe the Indianapolis game will be. But my point is, we're going to learn pretty quickly about the chemistry between Moore and Mahomes, Valdes-Scantling and Mahomes, Smith-Schuster, Mahomes. And even if Mecole Hardman, I'm sure in the building, they're like, come on, man, this is why we drafted you. This is your chance. And again, it's just being ready to act quickly, because all those guys are going to go in the second half of fantasy drafts. One of them might emerge. One of them could be hot to open the season. Mahomes is going to need to make a connection with at least one of these guys if they're going to hang with the likes of Buffalo and Tampa and their divisional opponents.
Yeah, that's fair. So wait, let me just ask you real quick, as a side note, does this make you want to invest in, like CEH or Ronald Jones because these games are going to be
Well, Ronald Jones, man. Ronald Jones is tough because if they give Ronald Jones dedicated goal line carries, then there's going to be something there. And the other thing about Ronald Jones is not lacking in ability. Ronald Jones, I think, is lacking in consistency and confidence in the building. And again, the Andy Reid teams usually have an ethos of whatever happened before, we don't care. You're with us now, and you're starting a clean slate. And Ronald Jones could easily be there's a scenario where he's league winner.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it's a 1% chance, but there are scenarios where he's unleashed because he has that ability to take any touch to the house. He's a power cutter with great acceleration. But there was something that came out. I can't remember the name of the Chiefs podcaster who got it out of Edwards-Helaire that he had his gallbladder out last offseason.
Yep.
And he said he was down to 160 pounds and really wasn't even totally himself going into camp. So if you're looking for an explanation of why Edwards-Helaire has been underwhelming, now you also could say we're just making another excuse for him. I don't know. It also is possible that Edwards-Helaire, and you're right to bring him up as another name that could take up that slack left by Tyreek Hill or otherwise establish that chemistry with Patrick Mahomes. But if we believe in Patrick Mahomes, and maybe you're right, Alex, that on a redraft basis, it's going to be frustrating. And I think we can ask similar questions about the Green Bay offense, which we'll talk about. Spoiler alert before the end of the show. However, even if you're a DFS player, I mean, who's doing fantasy that's doing at least a little dabbling in DFS? These are still going to be, your millie maker. It's picking the right Packer that week. It's picking the right Chief that week because they are all going to have depressed prices because of the uncertainty.
Yep. Exactly. And again, you got that uncertainty is so fun to be able to target because it's cheap. Uncertainty is very cheap in fantasy football. And again, the uncertainty is why, Leonard Fournette was a value. It's why the uncertainty in that 49ers offense last year with Brandon Ayuk ascending and George Kittle being George Kittle, that uncertainty was what allowed us to draft Deebo Samuel because we weren't sure if his injury history was going to hold up.
Right.
And what happened? Both those guys were great. And what were they? They were cheap because of uncertainty. So I'm with you. I think uncertainty is a great thing. And when things are ambiguous, that's the time to try to figure it out and throw a little bit more darts and, spread your chips out because, something is going to hit when you have that kind of uncertainty in that range. But I absolutely love that. My fourth player is a guy that I was not really that on most of this offseason. And I might say his name wrong because I get it wrong at least half the time. But Amon-Ra St. Brown is my fourth player and is someone that the longer this offseason has gone on, the more I see on him that gets me really, really excited. So for one, Sig, I'm going to name you every rookie wide receiver round 3 or later with an 80+ rookie year PFF grade. You ready for this?
Okay.
These players include Doug Baldwin, Keenan Allen, Tyreek Hill, Terry McLaurin, Chris Godwin, Amon-Ra St. Brown, end of list.
Yeah.
That's it. That's a pretty good list. Yeah. And then you add in the fact that would you hold on? Let me backtrack real quick. You would agree that the first few weeks for rookies are pretty tough. They're kind of getting into the NFL game speed. Things are tough like that. Usually the second back half of the season is where they start to figure things out, right? Okay, well, let's take a half a season sample size. I'm not going to, throw 4 games at you and say Rashad Penny from these 4 weeks was amazing. Let's go half a season, 9 weeks. From weeks 10 to the end of the season, Amon-Ra St. Brown was the wide receiver 5 in fantasy football. The only wide receivers above him, Devontae Adams, Justin Jefferson, Cooper Kupp, Deebo Samuel. Who were the top 4 wide receivers for that entire year? Those 4 guys.
Right.
So for the second half of the season, after he got out of that rookie bump, he was the best wide receiver in all of fantasy football, not named those 4 guys.
Right.
And then you add in the fact that he was among those guys in the PFF grade. You add in the fact that he commanded a 21.4% target share as a rookie with an even higher 23.7% red zone target share. He commanded a high target share. It's not like he just had a good week. For the whole season, he commanded a lot of targets and was even better in the red zone. It's not going to be DJ Shark. Jameson Williams is coming off an ACL.
Right.
TJ Hawkinson has never commanded a super high, target share. And Amon-Ra St. Brown, it's not like he's going as a top 20 wide receiver. He's going closer to wide receiver 30 than he is to 20 right now.
Right.
And this is one of those guys that, Sig, what did we just talk about? Ambiguous places where we don't know what things are going to look like and how this offense has changed. Amon-Ra St. Brown, I think, is the truth. And I think that he's going to be really good this year.
Yeah. I like that you can connect the dots of your analysis, Alex, and just say, maybe he's really good. Maybe he's a really good player. Maybe the explanation for everything that happened is he's good. He's # good at football. This, like Gabriel Davis, was a player who was polarizing for a lot of the offseason among those of us that spend way too much time thinking about football, fantasy football. And I think people have just overthought the situation as you've laid out. The only, I would say, you ding him a little bit in 0.5 PPR, but not enough to say that he's not
Agreed.
worth being one of your main targets. But I think you laid out a perfect case that, again, the PFF grade is something semi-objective to say. Even if you say his volume, well, DeAndre Swift was hurt, and Jared Goff doesn't throw downfield, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So his production was created by external factors, but PFF grade is supposed to be an internal factor, right? It's supposed to be based on the player's performance and not environmental factors. So that gives you some sense that no, it was Amon-Ra St. Brown was actually playing well. And also point out, yeah, Jared Goff's going to be the quarterback again. I think you laid out a great case too that DJ Chark, Jameson Williams, these are players that are better tactical pieces than production pieces because they're going to stretch out the defense. They're going to give the team a deep threat that allows Amon-Ra St. Brown more room to operate underneath. But the most important thing, I think, to make this sticky from year to year, and again, people I think have overthought this. I mean, any player who comes out of the gate in his rookie year and produces like him, except for maybe Darius Slayton. I don't know what happened there. Darius Slayton can still be good. Someone to trade for him. Is the name Ben Johnson? People need to know the name Ben Johnson, the new offensive coordinator for the Lions. And folks should know that, and Dan Campbell's good, and the Lions are good. Really, I'm going to turn this into a kumbaya, let's feel good about the Lions take, right? Maybe it can finally turn around. Maybe Lions fans can finally have something to be excited about. Because Ben Johnson, at the same time that Dan Campbell kind of pushed Anthony Lynn to the fringe, about a month left in the season, and leaned in on the offensive side, his protege, Ben Johnson, also got a lot bigger part of the weekly game plan and just the offensive coaching. And they were so happy with him that they promoted him to offensive coordinator. Who was his number one fan in the offense, Alex? Amon-Ra St. Brown. Who did Amon-Ra St. Brown give credit to in his breakout at the end of the year? Ben Johnson. So if you're looking again for something sticky to say, oh, this was just a fluke, he just got peppered with targets because, well, that's as far as Jared Goff can throw, and DeAndre Smith was banged up. But you have the man who's now in charge of this offense and this target having this connection. This is that soft information that isn't necessarily going to show up in a data analysis, but it's going to give you a clue of the why. And if you understand the why, you have a lot better chance of predicting the N+1 iteration.
I love that. And one other thing I wanted to add on to that is a lot of times with those PFF grade things, people say that they aren't like sticky because it'll have the lowest number of routes run and stuff like that. Among those 6 players that I named, including Amon-Ra St. Brown, he had the highest number of total routes run out of all those players. So all those players like had a lower threshold that kind of hinted they became great. Amon-Ra St. Brown ran the most routes out of all those guys. So like he was good for the longest amount of time among all those players and still hit those metrics. With everything that you said to Ben Johnson, the other thing I want to add on real quick, and we will move on. Matt Harmon said himself that when he was charting Amon-Ra St. Brown's season, over the second half of the season, i.e. when Ben Johnson took over, they changed his role to run a lot more layup routes, the smaller, shorter distance routes that allowed him to be a playmaker, put the ball in his hands, and let him be 11th in the NFL in yards after the catch last year. And we'll probably see more of the same this year. I'm excited. You're excited. And we will move on to our final picks before we get into your flag plant. Sig, we will start with you. Who is your final must-have half PPR player for today?
Yeah, and it's not sexy, but again, you got to have targets at the end of your draft. Endgame can be important. Endgame can be so important. Getting that one player in your last 5 picks who actually is a consistent performer. I think it could be Randall Cobb.
Wow.
I think it absolutely could be Randall Cobb. And I don't think there's that much to this take, Alex. Who's the player that a quarterback specifically demanded that his team acquire if he was going to come back and play for them? Who's the player that is the player that this quarterback is going to look to when the bullets are flying? Who's Aaron Rodgers going to look to on a 3rd and 5 that they got to make it? Or they're down by 4 points last drive of the game. They got to get a touch. It's going to be Randall Cobb. Now, I get it. Randall Cobb can't stay on the field. Randall Cobb is past his prime. Okay. I mean, that's all fair. Randall Cobb costs a last round pick or last 2 or 3 round pick. The thing I really want people to understand about Randall Cobb, again, looking at some hard data. Okay. I'm going to tell you, Alex, and Randall Cobb's stat lines when he got at least 5 targets last year. Okay.
Please.
569 and 2 touchdowns.
Yep.
315 and 2 touchdowns. 3 for 50 and 4 for 95 and a touchdown.
Wow.
And that's wide receiver one production, man. Now, I get it. Touchdowns are hard to predict year to year and so on and so forth. And yeah, he's going to have to get 5 targets a game. Okay, he has to be on the field. He has to actually get those targets. But anytime he got decent volume, he produced last year. And it makes sense that even though Randall Cobb is not your typical post up in the red zone kind of player, that this is going to be Aaron Rodgers' guy in the red zone. Come on, what do we know about Aaron Rodgers? We were talking about this with Marquez Valdez-Scantling, where he froze out Valdez-Scantling because Valdez-Scantling wasn't freelancing the way he wanted him to, and Valdez-Scantling was doing what the coaches wanted him to do, right? So as you're breaking in Christian Watson, we'll see Robert Tonyan. And I'm okay with Tonyan. Again, this is one of those things where Aaron Rodgers is going to be fine for fantasy. The Packers offense is going to be fine. The Packers offense could actually even be better because David Bakhtiari should be back. Elgin Jenkins is going to be back, maybe not the very beginning of the year. But remember, they were playing last year without Bakhtiari except for one game, and then Jenkins went down later in the year. They were playing an undrafted free agent, Josh Nyman, who's good, actually. They have a good swing tackle now. So the Packers have really done an incredible job at the tackle position. So they were doing well last year. Now, how much of that was Devontae Adams, we'll see. But statistically, Aaron Rodgers has been fine over the last 3 years in his games without Adams, and the offense has been fine. So again, someone's going to outproduce it. If you used to disagree with me on Cobb, he's washed up, well, then put your chip on Alan Lazard, put your chip on Robert Tonyan, put your chip on Aaron Jones. Maybe Aaron Jones is going to catch 90 balls this year. Put it on somebody, because this offense is going to produce at least one big overachiever.
I love that. And again, the theme of this episode has turned into these newer players being added in, situations changing massively, and these ambiguous backfields or wide receiver rooms or whatever you want to call it. And this Packers one is probably among the most, ambiguous for how this could shake out. And I think that, me and you could sit here today. We could say, I think that Alan Lazard will lead the team in fantasy points. I think Christian Watson will lead the team in fantasy points at wide receiver. I think Randall Cobb will lead the team in fantasy points. I think Romeo Doubs will lead the team. Okay, maybe not that, but you can literally see those outcomes. And that's where here, it's fun to take darts, at the end of your drafts. These are the guys that we're talking about. Randall Cobb right now, and this is what people are going to discount what you're saying. Randall Cobb is probably your last round draft pick that'll be off your team week 1 or before training camp if there's some other stud that you end up going after. The price is not expensive, and that's where we can exploit it. Like you said, one of those last 5 picks that ends up really good for you this year. But Sigmund, my last player that I am so excited about was almost my flag plant. Ooh. He's my number 2 player, will definitely be my guy this year, and it's Trey Lance. I cannot get enough of Trey Lance, and it starts with the fact that going into last season, over the last decade, since 2011, almost every player that has had at least 4.5 rush attempts per game, 4.5, that's not that much, has been a top 8 QB in fantasy points per game. 4.5 rush attempts per game. Sig, there's only 3 QBs that weren't top 8 QBs in points per game that hit that. Right. You know who those QBs are? 2012 Tim Tebow, 2014 Colin Kaepernick, and 2020 Cam Newton. That's the list.
So what you're saying is you have to be just one of the worst passers in the entire NFL.
Yep.
Yeah.
If you can throw the ball down the field, if you can throw the ball down the field and connect with someone at least 50% of the time, and you rush more than 5 times, you are going to be a top 8 QB in fantasy points per game. That is Lance's floor.
Right.
He could literally be Jalen Hurts on steroids this year. He's Jalen Hurts with really much better weapons. And what Jalen Hurts was last year, where Greg Ward was one of the top targeted wide receivers. Jalen Reagor was a top 4 targeted wide receiver. And then you give Trey Lance, Deebo Samuel, let's hope, George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, Danny Gray, who I think is super underrated. Also a great offensive line. And then you add in the fact that, yes, it is a small sample size, but Lance averaged 10.3 rush attempts per game and had at least 15 fantasy points in all 3 games that he started last year. Remember, do you know, Sig, who led the NFL in most QB1 performances? Oh, it was Jalen Hurts, because he has a ridiculously high rushing floor. We've seen it year after year after year with Lamar Jackson and then Kyler Murray and then Jalen Hurts, these second-year rushing quarterbacks with solid weapons break out year after year. Trey Lance is going to be that guy this year. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. As long as he's the starter, it's going to be him.
I'm not going to disagree with you. This is going to be one of the more interesting stories, right? This whole Trey Lance thing is one of the great soap operas. Still to this day, people get in arguments about what actually happened, right?
Yeah.
Some people still insist that Kyle wanted Mac Jones. And then Chris Sims, spilled all the tea about that. And then everybody reacted. We really moved up for Mac Jones, and Shanahan felt hemmed in. I don't know. Or Shanahan wanted Trey Lance all along. Count me in the group, by the way, that was just flabbergasted at the idea of trading up for Mac Jones. I actually think Mac Jones, you want to hear a hot take? You want to do not a flag plant, Alex? I don't even know if Mac Jones is going to get a second contract from the Patriots. Boom.
Wow.
Said it.
I met Mac Jones. I'm a Patriots fan. You can't say that.
You and I both know, because I know you watched every play of every game for the Patriots last year. Mac Jones did not add a lot of value to that offense.
Agree.
Davis Mills, if Davis Mills was a third round pick of the Patriots instead of Mac Jones being a first round pick, we would be gushing about Davis Mills. Anyway, and I don't want to make this Patriots take. We'll see what they do without Josh McDaniels. Maybe you could call plays for them, Alex, if you put your name out there. Really, if you're listening, Patriots, this guy's smart. So I think you should take a look at him as your play caller this year. So look, with Trey Lance, I was over exuberant about Trey Lance last year, going into the draft, going into the season. I still think Trey Lance can be just outstanding from a fantasy standpoint, from an NFL standpoint. And the exciting thing is we have only seen one running quarterback in the Kyle Shanahan offense. It was Robert Griffin III. He was a revelation. And as you pointed out, Alex, this time around, Trey Lance has Kittle, hopefully Samuel, Ayuk. And I love that you mentioned Danny Gray. That's your Darnell Mooney. Not so much in the role, but that's the kind of player he can be.
Yep.
But in that rookie year when Robert Griffin III was a revelation for fantasy and in the NFL, he was throwing to Aldrick Robinson and Josh Morgan and Fred Davis and a late career Pierre Garçon. Okay. And it was also not an offensive line with Trent Williams and Alex Mack and so on. So Trey Lance is set up for massive success, massive success, because the running game, the Kyle Shanahan, maybe it's the Mike McDaniel running game. That's a whole, we'll talk about Miami in a second. It's difficult to defend. And then when you add in that you have to play 11-on-11 football and you have a threat. And one of the things I love about Trey Lance is he really does turn into a running back. I mean, he really does have body lean. He uses pads as like striking surfaces. He doesn't give defenders a lot to hit. He's big. He's rugged. What I'm trying to say is he's the kind of quarterback, unlike Robert Griffin III, that a coach is going to feel just fine letting get that kind of volume. We'll see about Justin Fields. Your take could also be a Justin Fields take, although in that Bears offense, 50% is asking a lot. Sorry, Darnell Mooney. Sorry, Cole Kmet. So yeah, this is another wonderful unknown upside situation. There's the caveat about Jimmy Garoppolo still going to be on the roster. There's the caveat of this could be a big zonk. Let's make a deal. People still watch that, where, Trey Lance is just not going to work. It's just not going to mentally work. I don't think that's going to happen. So I love the Trey Lance take. And I really think the larger fantasy take here is have super flex leagues, because it's boring, right? If you can wait and take what's Trey Lance right now, Alex? Is he even in the top 10 quarterbacks?
No, he's outside. He's like 13 right now.
Yeah. So if you can wait and take Trey Lance in your one quarterback league, it just makes the position kind of boring because there's more than 12 quarterback ones now.
Yep, I 100% agree. Totally with you. But as much as I'm with you, I'm even more excited to hear my favorite question of all, your 2022 flag plant, your boldest prediction that you believe in. Sig, I will leave the floor up to you.
Sure.
What is your flag plant for this year?
Yeah. I haven't, with our rankings and our projections, we communicate to the people that consume our work, and I haven't gone bold enough yet. I need to move these two players very close to each other in rankings, if not actually next to each other, because I think how it's going to play out is that, and I'll put it in hot take form. The hot take form is I think Jalen Waddle. See, if I say can, that's not a hot take. So I'll just do it in hot take form. Quote me, whatever. Jalen Waddle will outproduce Tyreek Hill.
Wow.
But the real fantasy actionable information here is, what's the gap right now in ADP, Alex? 3 rounds, 4 rounds between the two of them? That's totally unjustified. Totally unjustified. They're going to be interchangeable in the offense. And who is going to get the bracket coverage? Who is the defense going to come into the game saying, we can't let this guy beat us?
Fair.
Tyreek Hill. Okay. Remember, Jalen Waddle was coming off a pretty gnarly injury last year, too. I think we're going to look back at Jalen Waddle's rookie year, Alex, and say, wow, it's pretty incredible that he produced the way he did, given all the conditions he had to swim upstream against. Now you have Tyreek Hill. And Tyreek Hill, I compare it to the tennis ball with the dog, right? Wherever you move Tyreek Hill, the defense is going to follow that.
Yeah.
Jalen Waddle is going to get into single coverage that he can roast. Okay. So I think that because they're players, I'm not saying Jalen Waddle is an equal to Tyreek Hill at this moment, but he gives you all the same strengths that Tyreek Hill gives you, including being a pretty good contested catch player for a small wide receiver. So as long as you think that Tua can be competent and you believe that Mike McDaniel can put his stamp on this offense early and use pre-snap motion and use the running game to put the defense in positions that are compromising, I think that Jalen Waddle, and I got to give a nod to my man Matt Waldman, who I a colleague, football guys again on the show a lot, because he very appropriately said last time, and this is similar to the Valdez-Scantling kind of take, where Waddle could easily have 4 or 5 touchdowns of 60 yards or more this year in this offense. And that alone could be the difference. So I just look at Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill and think they should be very much closer in ADP. And I think when you add in the price it gets to each player, it's as simple. Let someone else take Tyreek Hill and go ahead and take Jalen Waddle. Take him around before ADP because he can easily be a top 10, top 15 wide receiver this year.
I love that. That is a great flag. But I agree. I think they should be closer together. I mean, I still have a hard time seeing, the Tyreek Hill, being overtaken by Jalen. But again, it's your flag plant. It's a hot take. It's not supposed to be this is easily going to happen.
Right.
But I think you're right that again, if he does see that much coverage and stuff like that, it's going to open things up for Jalen Waddle. I'm interested to see what Tua does, and I think that if Tyreek, plays the Tyreek role, that Jalen Waddle could really eat underneath, which is kind of Tua's bread and butter. It seems like so far. That's not to say that I think Tyreek Hill is going to be bad. I think Tyreek Hill is still going to be very good. I think people, I think that he's going to be just fine with Tua. Like I know that he had one bad pass in practice that slipped out of his hand, and therefore he dropped like 2 rounds in ADP. But that's just fantasy football for you. That's Twitter. That's just how things go. But nonetheless, I love that take. I'm super excited. And Sig, I'm beyond happy and excited that I got to have you on the show today. You were a phenomenal guest for the entire episode. I very much appreciate it. Before we go, anything you want to plug, anything you want to work on at our great company that we are colleagues at before we get out of here?
Oh, it's first of all, it's wonderful to have you and many people that are less than half of my age. And I say that proudly because you guys still like to hang out with me and talk to me. The road hasn't passed me by yet. It's football guys. If you're passionate about football, about fantasy football, then there's something here for you. And we always over deliver. And I think more than anything, Alex, we enjoy it.
Yep.
We enjoy what we do. Most of all, our number one goal is always to enjoy what we're doing and enjoy each other's company and enjoy sharing these experiences and the back and forth and the banter. It's always in good spirits. And this is about something that helps us relax. It's a release. It's an escape. It doesn't have to be something that we bring in all the competition and all the anxiety that's out there. So it's really great. And I'm thankful that I've been able to hang around this world long enough to watch the generations come up like yourself and so many other great people doing great work out there. And again, that most of all just are stimulated by other live minds and really like to hear what other people are thinking, put it all to the test, play it all out, hand out the medals and the awards, and then start over again next year.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself. That is so awesome. And again, appreciate you having the show today. It was an absolute blast. And for you listeners, we appreciate you listening along with us today and getting to talk about the greatest sport on earth in fantasy football itself. But as always, please leave a review. You guys already know what to do. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day.